Hi there, smart driver. Talking to you about left-hand turns. If you're going to get into trouble when you're learning how to drive, left-hand turns is generally the place that new drivers are going to have a crash. We're going to give you tips and strategies, skills to reduce your chances of being involved in a crash on a left-hand turn. Corey is here. Corey is the moderator. Corey does an excellent job of getting up the videos I suggest you have a look at. As well, Elevator Fan is tuning in from Monticello, Indiana. If you're just tuning in, let us know where you're tuning in from, what class of license you're working towards. When is your driver's test? Please tell me you're not postponing your driver's test until next spring. Do not do that. Owing to the fact that it is easier to get your driver's test in the winter time. Okay, there is not snow on the roads 24/7 throughout the winter time. It only snows about 4% of the time. And if roads are treacherous and there is a lot of snow, as there was in Calgary, Alberta, Canada last night, and buses were spinning out on hills and those types of things, they will postpone your test to another day. They will not take you out. They know that you do not have a high skill level. In addition, other reasons that your test is easier to take in the wintertime, there are less vulnerable road users out sharing road space. So there are fewer pedestrians, fewer cyclists, kids on e-scooters, those types of things. It's going to make driving easier. It's going to be easier to get a test date. Driving examiners are less stressed because the winter time is their low season, whereas summertime is their high season, and everybody in the summertime is trying to book in for a driver's test and take a driver's test. Know that it's going to be less, the driving test is going to be more relaxed because the driving instructor, or because the driving examiner is relaxed. In addition to that, finally, taking your driver's test in the wintertime, it's less exact, okay? You don't have to get 6 to 8 inches from the curb when you parallel park. You don't have to stop at the correct stopping position. It's two-way stop sign intersections. You just have to stop before the sidewalk, creep out until you can see, and then proceed. As well, when you parallel park, when you do your slow speed maneuvers, you just have to get in behind the vehicle in front of you. Know that for the purpose of taking your driver's test in the wintertime, and Corey will put up the video for you on reasons why it is easier to take your driver's test in the wintertime. Do not listen to all the naysayers out there that, oh my God, you're going to die in the wintertime. No, you'll be perfectly fine. The other point about taking your driver's test in the wintertime, if you have decent tires on your vehicle that you're using, your parents have good tires on the vehicle that you're using, all the tires are M&S rated, which means mud and snow, or they have the mountain snowflake symbol on them. As long as you have good tread, all vehicles in this day and age are going to be front-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, or all-wheel drive. There are very few vehicles. I mean, unless you're driving a Mustang or a Camaro, there are very few vehicles that are rear-wheel drive, which is one of the most challenging vehicles to drive in the wintertime. So that's the other reason that you should take your test in the wintertime. If it does snow, if there is a bit of snow, Corey will put up the videos with Willie that I did with him. He learned how to drive in the wintertime, learned some additional skills, and got kudos on his driving test because he did learn how to drive in the wintertime and took his test in the wintertime. Yes. The other point about taking your test in the wintertime is there's going to be more snow the farther you get away from the main road. So if you're out on the main road, which is where most of your test is going to be taken, the roads are going to be cleared, plowed, well salted, well sanded. It's when you get into the suburbs a little bit, there's going to be a little bit of snow and those types of things, but it's going to be easy to deal with because you're traveling at lower speeds in the wintertime. Now, let's just go back to talking about Calgary, Alberta in the wintertime, and there was there were images coming across Twitter and they're like, oh my God, these people can't drive. And of course, all the rhetoric about putting winter tires on buses, and they'd already spent tens of millions of dollars putting all weather tires. As we talked about, all weather tires are kind of a intermediate between full winter tires and all season tires, because all weather tires, the rubber compound is not quite as soft as it is on winter tires, but it is softer than it is on an all season tire. And so the transit authorities spent tens of millions of dollars putting all weather tires on their vehicles. What needs to be understood about winter driving is that when you get snow and the temperature is around freezing, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius, it is treacherous and slippery, and authorities should just cancel the day and tell everybody to go home because it is so slippery, and it is more dangerous to drive in Seattle, Washington, or Victoria on Vancouver Island when they get snow than it is to drive when it's minus 20 in Winnipeg, Manitoba, or Fargo, North Dakota, because when it's minus 20, the snow is actually sticky and the tires on your vehicle actually grab onto that snow and ice. When the temperature is near zero and you get snow, the snow is melting, freezing, and you get a layer of water on top of the ice. Think of an ice hockey arena after the Zamboni goes out and floods the ice. There is a layer of water on top of the ice, and that is what lubricates the ice and makes it extremely slippery. My first experience living on Vancouver Island, the first experience of getting snow there, I was just I was gobsmacked at how slippery it was. It was like driving on grease. I could not ever imagine that because I had not experienced that before. So this is what happened in Calgary, Alberta last night. The temperature was near freezing. All the buses spun out. They couldn't get around because the ice and snow was so slippery. Therefore, driving in the wintertime, take note of what the outside temperature is. That's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about left-hand turns. There's a poll here. Answer the poll. Do you avoid making left-hand turns? If you do, nobody is going to hold that against you, and this does not make you less of a driver because it is statistically proven that left-hand turns are dangerous, and large fleets like UPS actually plan their drivers' routes so that they can avoid making left-hand turns at all costs. All right, let me just say that they have logistical software and map software that when they give the driver a route, these routes all favor and use right-hand turns for those routes as opposed to using left-hand turns because it is safer than left-hand turns. And I'll talk about the reasons why left-hand turns are dangerous. First and foremost, if you're involved in a crash, because you're crossing oncoming traffic, you're involved in a T-bone crash, and there is very little in your vehicle, the vehicle that's doing the turning, not the oncoming vehicles, the vehicles that are doing the turning, that protects occupants within the vehicle. The other tragic consequence of T-bone crashes is oftentimes it's a friend or a partner that's in the vehicle. When I say partner, your wife, your spouse, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, those types of things. And because all of the energy of the incoming vehicle is often concentrated right at the door, it's going to be transferred into your torso, and the person who is struck in a T-bone crash is killed as a consequence. So the driver then has to deal with that fallout of that kind of a crash. And I refuse to make unprotected left turns. I turn right and go miles out of my way. It's not always miles out of your way, Ann, but it is, around the block to come back to make the same kind of turn if you make four right turns as opposed to one left turn. Paul, drivers must keep themselves back from any vehicle in front if brake lights are disabled. Yes. And it was curious what Paul was talking about brake lights that are disabled in the last couple of weeks. And I believe I have this on dash cam. I'll have to look it up. The third brake light and the third, so there's two on the outside brake lights, and then there's the third one in the middle that has been around since the late 1980s, 1990s. I would need to look up when that came into effect. But a couple of the vehicles that I were following, the third middle brake light was out. It wasn't working. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I haven't seen that in a long time. And then just the other day, I saw one of the newer vehicles. I believe it was a Hyundai. I'm not sure. It had 5 brake lights. So it had the 3 recommended, manufacturer required brake lights, and then it had 2 more down near the bumper. The whole back end lit up when the brakes were applied on this vehicle, which was like, holy cow, that's a lot of brake on the back end of the vehicle. So just let me know in the comments if you're tuning in now or joining us what you think about 3 brake lights, and then vehicles that are now coming out with 5 brake lights on the back of the vehicle, because 5 brake lights is a lot of brake lights. And do you see that as a potential distraction when you're driving, especially now that most of us are spending a great deal of time, excuse me, especially right now with a lot of us driving around at night a lot more, because, especially where I live, it gets dark at 4 o'clock. It's not light until 8 o'clock in the morning. So we only get, excuse me, we only get 8 hours of daylight that we're driving around in. So do you find that distracting as a driver on the roadways? Left-hand turns, why are they so dangerous? One of the reasons that they're dangerous is usually it happens at busy intersections. We are also of the thinking and conviction that you must move into the intersection. I'm fortunate and happy to say that in my experience of observing traffic, I do not see that most people move into the intersection excuse me, and wait back. Rather, they wait back at the edge of the intersection where they should be waiting to make the left-hand turn. Your safest way to make a left-hand turn is to wait back at the edge of the intersection. Your landmark for that is the front steer tires on the front crosswalk line, looking at the oncoming traffic, and you see your gap behind a vehicle. So there's a white vehicle, it's coming towards the intersection. Behind that, there's sufficient gap for you to make your left-hand turn. As soon as that white vehicle hits the stop line on the other side of the intersection, then you can start to proceed straight into the intersection. When that vehicle goes past, then you can make your left-hand turn. And I had this question from a smart driver the other day in the comments about which one is faster, and I believe waiting back at the intersection, at the edge of the intersection, and then driving into the intersection and meeting the gap is a faster, more expedient path through the intersection than being in the middle of the intersection. Because if you're in the middle of the intersection, you're starting from a dead stop. When that other vehicle goes by, you're completely stopped. Whereas if you stay back, now you can get the vehicle going and you can meet that gap and then make your left-hand turn, and you will move as many or more vehicles through the intersection. In addition to that, by staying back at the edge of the intersection, it allows you a better vantage point of the entire intersection. When you're making the left-hand turn, pedestrians and vulnerable road users on that cross street into which you're turning, they have the right of way, and you must give way to them before executing your turn and moving through that intersection. So pedestrians have to be through the intersection so you can see them. If you're sitting in the middle of the intersection to make your left-hand turn when there's pedestrians on that cross street, it's difficult to see them, and you actually have to turn your head and shoulder check. Or what's going to happen is the A-pillar, the piece of metal in your car that holds the edge of the windshield in, that is going to create a blind spot where you cannot see out there, and you're going to have to move around that. Whereas if you're back, you don't have that blind area owing to how your vehicle is situated in waiting to proceed through the intersection. Those are some of the key points of making left-hand turns. In addition to that, 42%, more than 40% of crashes happen at intersections. And intersections are also the place that you are most likely to encounter vulnerable road users, pedestrians, kids on e-scooters, cyclists, motorcycle riders, all these people that if they get hit, they are the ones that are going to potentially die in a crash. Now, as in addition to all of that, keep in mind that if you strike a pedestrian at any rate of speed, there's a high probability that it's going to be a fatal crash. They're going to die as a consequence of that crash. And intersections are the place where you're most likely to encounter vulnerable road users. left-hand turns. And the other reason, as I mentioned before, in terms of T-bone crashes, there is very little in the vehicle that is going to protect you in the event of a left-hand turn. There are some high-end cars that do have reinforcements and beefed up supports in the door, but still, what happens is oftentimes is the vehicle that's turning is on a bit of an angle, and the vehicle coming in will catch the bumper or whatnot, and all of that energy of the incoming vehicle is concentrated in one spot, right at the vital organs of the person, the vehicle occupant inside the vehicle. And this is what makes them dangerous and deadly in intersections when making left-hand turns. Paul, mostly on Sunday evenings, northbound on Yonge Street downtown. Cars have to stop sign to wait a lot for pedestrian crossings. You really wonder how cars manage to squeeze through a left-hand turn. Yes, there are busy intersections where sometimes, you do have to push through. And it's the same thing if you're driving in Europe or places where there are roundabouts. There are some times that you do have to push through, but you have to pick a line and go slow when you're pushing through to give other traffic, as you're talking about pedestrians and whatnot, give them time to respond to your moving vehicle moving through the intersection. Know that for the purposes of keeping yourself safe and keeping other people on the roadway safe. Because you have not only a duty of care to keep yourself safe, but also to keep other people safe on the roadways. If you are ever sued, and this happens more than you would like to think in the United States especially, not so much here in Canada, but more so in the United States, you have a duty of care which is outlined in many places, the Highway Traffic Act for one, but also in the driver's handbook. If you look closely at the driver's handbook, it will spell out a duty of care that you have to other road users sharing the road space. And here in Michigan, it's common for drivers to run red lights, so it's important to not assume you can turn left on a yellow. Yes, exactly what Ann just said. If you're going to make a left-hand turn and the light goes yellow and you're going to make the turn on the yellow light, ensure that oncoming traffic has come to a stop. Double, triple check that oncoming traffic has in fact stopped and is coming to a stop before you proceed into harm's way through the intersection. Elevator fan, making left-hand turns can be more difficult right now as people are traveling for the holidays. Yes, they are traveling for the holidays, especially in the United States, because Thursday is Thanksgiving, Friday is Black Friday. Friday is Black Friday. I wanted to say another day of the week. One of the days of the week that ends in Y. There we go. So yes, Thanksgiving is in the United States on Thursday, Black Friday. Be safe driving there the end of this week, because it is busy in the United States of America and driving. And there's lots and lots of people who are traveling. We were in China some years ago during the Chinese New Year. They said, somebody informed us or gave us the information that there were 100 million people in China that were traveling. Just a crazy number. I don't think there's 100 million people in the United States who are traveling, but there are a significant number of people who are traveling for the holidays at the end of the week here in a couple of days. Know that. All right. Left-hand turns, this is what we're talking about. So we'll have a presentation here, short presentation. We'll get through that, 10 or 12 minutes, and then we'll come back. We'll spend the remainder of the hour answering questions, helping you to pass the driver's test and to become a safer, smarter driver. Talking about ludicrous left-hand turns, the reason that these are dangerous is owing to T-bone crashes that result from left-hand turns. Left-hand turns, you're crossing the oncoming traffic on the other side of the intersection, and sometimes there is confusion about the light system. Sometimes it is integrated into the existing traffic light, and sometimes it is a different separate light stand with a different traffic light on it. If it is a different separate light that is controlling the left-hand turning traffic, it will have a sign on it that says for left turn traffic only. Be conscious of that and be aware of that. Now, the other part of left-hand turns at busy, complex intersections with left-hand turns is that some people are confused because there will be a flashing green light, an advanced green light, which gives priority to the left turning traffic. That will end, and then the light will go green, and you can still make a left-hand turn at the intersection. But some drivers are confused by this, and then they proceed to make a left-hand turn without giving way to the oncoming traffic that now has priority after the advanced green has stopped. And there is traffic engineers are trying to sort out this problem to reduce the number of crashes made during left-hand turns. For those of you new to Smart Drive Test, my name is Rick August. I was a truck driver in the 1990s. I held freight between Ontario, Canada, and the United States. While I was going to university in Australia in the early 2000s, I drove buses for Greyhound, one of the regional bus lines there. So I have truck experience and I have bus experience. 1997, I became a licensed commercial driving instructor. Crazy to think I've been doing this for almost 3 decades. And most of my experience teaching people has been with semi-trucks, buses, air brakes, logbooks, those types of things. But you have to know all of the car stuff, the basic information in order to upgrade to a higher license. So positions that you have to stop at a two-way stop sign intersection, rules for four-way stop sign intersections, yield signs, all that information is applicable to the higher class license. And oftentimes it comes as a surprise for people upgrading to a semi-truck license that they have to go back and study all the car information in addition to the air brakes, the logbooks, and all the other rules and information that they need to know in order to pass their CDL license test. 2006, I graduated from the University of Melbourne with a doctorate in legal history. Legal history is the study of policing, courts, and prisons. My expertise is in policing as it relates to traffic, oddly enough. 2015, 10 years ago, I started the online YouTube channel, and it has been wildly more successful than I could have imagined. And we are still going forward with YouTube and doing what we need to do on YouTube. I have been lamenting how much the channel has dropped off this year, and I'm thinking and suspecting that it has something to do with AI. However, there are people on Twitter and other social media platforms who are lamenting about the fact that their channels have been completely eliminated. So I can't complain too much because we're still here. We're still helping people to pass the driver's test and become safer, smarter drivers. But at one and the same time, it has definitely been the worst year for me on YouTube since I started. If you look at any kind of numbers on my channel, views have dropped 50% in the last 3 months. So I need to do some serious thinking about how I'm going to recover some of that. All right, information to check out. Look at the left-hand turn video. We give you step-by-step instructions to be successful in passing your driver's test and executing left-hand turns, not only safely, but also to help you to pass your driver's test. Have a look at the podcast available over at the Smart Drive Test website or other platforms where podcasts are delivered, and pass your driver's test first time. Tips and strategies and skills and abilities that you need to be successful on passing your driver's test first time. Why are left-hand turns dangerous? Because you are crossing the oncoming lines of traffic. There's no protection in the vehicle, and many new drivers, inexperienced drivers, misjudge the gap. There are 3 things when you're learning how to do left-hand turns, when you're learning how to drive. Start in a quiet area. Get comfortable with the steering wheel. If you are not comfortable with the steering wheel, with the accelerator, with the brake, you should not be on the roadway. You should be in a parking lot learning how to master those primary controls in the vehicle, the steering wheel, the brake, and the accelerator, and figuring out how to turn the vehicle. If you are asking your mentors, if you are asking me and other people on social media how much to turn the steering wheel when going around a corner, you should not be on the roadway. At least you should not be in a busy part of the city. You should be in a parking lot, in a quiet area, in the residential areas and those types of things, learning how much to turn the steering wheel going around corners and those types of things. So do that, get comfortable with the vehicle, master the vehicle in a parking lot, That way you can just focus on the car. You don't have to focus on everything else that is going on, especially when doing left-hand turns. So do that in a parking lot and get comfortable with it so that you can just focus on maneuvering the vehicle without a lot of distractions with other traffic and road users and people crossing the street and those types of things. Every turn, shoulder check, shoulder check, shoulder check. You need to shoulder check left. And smart drivers over the years have come back and said, well, there's a concrete barrier there. Why am I shoulder checking? You're shoulder checking to create the habit of ABS. Always be scanning. People get complacent after they get their driver's license. The first skill that they lose is shoulder checking. They say, well, I just drove past there. Why do I need to look? Because traffic is always changing. It is dynamic. Therefore, you need to be always scanning. You need to be checking, double checking. It's like being a carpenter. Measure twice, cut once. It's the same thing with a car, except the consequences are a lot more dire. Not a lot more dire, but as a carpenter, you may cut off a finger if you're not using the power tools correctly. In a car, you could have a crash, right? You could run over somebody. You could hurt them. You could potentially kill them in a car, right? So look twice, go once. Shoulder check, shoulder check, shoulder check. ABS, always be scanning, okay? Every time you change directions of the vehicle. We know as driving experts that the average driver crashes once every 15 years. Unfortunately, this lulls many drivers into the false sense of what I'm doing is okay because I haven't had a crash in 10 years. Yeah, well, you haven't, but eventually, maybe all of the circumstances will come together that at year 12, you will have a crash. So create the habit of shoulder checking so that in 8, 10, 12 years, it will save you, it will protect you, and keep you safe in your vehicles and prevent you being involved in a crash. Okay? Anytime that you're turning the steering wheel, you should be shoulder checking. It is critical to your safe driving, especially on left-hand turns. My teaching for left-hand turns, front steer tire on the front crosswalk. That is your landmark to be at the edge of the intersection. You're waiting there, you're checking 3 things. You're watching the traffic light, you're watching the oncoming traffic to make sure that there is a gap or it's going to come to a stop if you're going to proceed on the yellow light, and you're watching the pedestrians and vulnerable road users on the cross street because they have the right of way. Waiting at the edge of the intersection, you are committed to the intersection, but you're not in the intersection if something goes wrong. If you're sitting in the intersection, you're waiting to turn left, and something goes wrong, you're in it. You don't want to be in it, okay? Stay out of the intersection until you can absolutely move through and clear. The other piece about this, if you get into the intersection and the light turns red, you have to clear the intersection. You own the intersection. You have to clear it as expediently as possible. And if you watch the old left-hand turn video, there is a pickup truck that I followed through that had to wait for the transport truck to come through the intersection before the driver could complete the left-hand turn on the red light. Going on yellow, going on red. Sometimes traffic will be so busy. Sometimes traffic will be so busy that you will have to turn on the yellow light. There just isn't a gap that presents itself and you're going to have to go on the yellow light. Sometimes you're going to have to go on the red because whatever happened, you got distracted. You were watching the pedestrians on the cross street. You were watching the oncoming traffic and all of a sudden it went from red to yellow. It went from yellow to red. You have to clear the intersection. You have to move in and expediently clear the intersection to get out of the intersection. That's what you need to do. All right, watch turning vehicles and pedestrians on multi-lane roads. If you're on a big intersection, oftentimes there will be a right slip lane on the other side of the intersection. So in addition to watching the traffic light, watching the oncoming traffic, and watching the pedestrians on the cross street, you also have to watch the right turning vehicles on the far side of the intersection so that you don't turn in beside them, because you don't want to go in like this. You want to either go in front of that vehicle or go in behind it. That's going to be an advanced safety strategy for you. Never merge in beside another vehicle. Always merge in behind or in front of them to prevent being involved in a collision, because more than half of vehicles, when making right turns or left turns on a multi-lane intersection will make the turn and then they'll drift over. They'll do the turn and a lane change at the same time. You don't want to be making lane changes at the same time that you're doing a turn. It increases your risk of being involved in a crash. To make yourself safer and keep yourself safe at intersections, you want to do things sequentially. You want to move through the intersection and then do your lane change. You want to do your turn, get the vehicle straight, point it in the direction you want it to go, and then make your lane change. That will reduce your chances of being involved in a crash. The number of crashes as an expert witness that I investigate where somebody has moved through an intersection and they're changing lanes at the same time, this results in crashes, and it exponentially increases your risk of being involved in a crash. So do things one thing at a time. Moving through the intersection, then change lanes. Make your turn, then change lanes to keep yourself safe on left-hand turns. And as Ann mentioned previously, on left-hand turns with yellow lights, double, triple, quadruple check that the oncoming traffic is in fact coming to a stop before you commit to making that left-hand turn and clearing the intersection. And remember, good luck on your driver's test, and remember, pick the best answer, not necessarily the right answer. Gissy, you are most welcome for the advice. Good channel. Thank you so much for your compliments there. That's awesome. Elevator fan, making left-hand turns can be more difficult right now as people are traveling. Yeah, we talked about that, about American Thanksgiving coming up here on Thursday and Black Friday. And as you know, they're saying on social media, most of us have big screen televisions right now. So put the groceries on sale, please. Put the groceries on sale, and they'll have a more successful Black Friday, because I don't really need another television right now, but I do buy a lot of groceries, and groceries are expensive. So if you haven't had a chance already, do have a look at the poll there. Answer the poll if you avoid left-hand turns. Now, the other driving culture that I do not agree with in the United States, particularly on the Eastern Seaboard, and you can answer this in the comments if you're watching now live or you're watching on the replay. U-turns at intersections. Do you make U-turns at intersections? When I was teaching driver training in Maryland a couple of years ago, they do U-turns in the state of Maryland. It is part of their driving culture. I do not endorse U-turns. I believe that they are dangerous. And in addition, I believe that many people simply do not have the required skills to safely execute U-turns at intersections. They are as dangerous or more dangerous than left-hand turns. So if you're doing U-turns, I would ask you to reconsider for reducing the risk of being involved in a crash at an intersection. 6070 says no, they don't do U-turns. So just let us know in the comments there if you do U-turns and it's part of the driving culture where you live. This is the other reason that I like roundabouts. Because if you get lost, and I remember, I recall the first time that I had this happen to me, I was driving buses in Australia and I made the wrong turn. You have to realize that U-turns, this was before GPS, that I was driving buses for Greyhound in Australia, and missed the turn. I drove down a couple of miles. There was a roundabout. I went around the roundabout, came back, made the right-hand turn on the street that I was supposed to turn onto, and I thought to myself, that's magic. Roundabouts are magic. And if you just Google any of the points of conflict in a conventional intersection as opposed to points of conflict in a roundabout, they are significantly reduced in a roundabout, the points of conflict. What I mean by points of conflict is the points in an intersection where two cars can potentially collide. It's like 8 or 10 points in a roundabout, and it's like 36 or 37 points of conflict in a conventional intersection. So in terms of safety and the number of crashes, roundabouts are significantly safer than conventional intersections. In addition to that, roundabouts move more traffic, more volume of traffic per hour, and they reduce urban noise pollution, which I am always on board for reducing urban noise pollution within cities. I lived in a rental unit that did not have very good insulation, did not have very good windows, and as anybody who's lived in a unit that's next to traffic with bad windows, they're noisy. And we lived at a stop sign at a busy intersection. It was noisy. It was very noisy, especially the jacked up 350 Chevys with the big diesel engines and the Harley Davidson motorcycles. You know, I only lived there a few months, but by the last month, I used to sit at the window, watch the big jacked up 350 Chevys go by, and I could hear Bruce Cockburn in my head. If I had a rocket launcher. Just, if you don't know the song, look it up on Google. Bruce Cockburn, If I Had a Rocket Launcher. And I just thought, you know, a couple of smoking, burning Harley Davidson carcasses and, you know, a big jacked up 350 Chevy, that might reduce some of the urban noise pollution that we are dealing with at this intersection. And, you know, all they had to do was pull it out and put it in an intersection. But of course, we as Canadians and Americans, not so much Americans, but Canadians, we really mess up a roundabout. You know, if it was the Europeans, you know, they would just take out the four-way stop signs, throw in a traffic button in the middle of the thing and call it a roundabout, right? We need to close down the intersection for months and months and months, and we have to put in all this concrete and move half a mountain to put in a roundabout. It's pretty crazy, the engineering that goes into roundabouts here, especially in where I live here in Vernon. A little bit of over-engineering, we can call it. Paul, some special traffic lights with a designated left-hand turn have signs informing drivers to U-turn. Yeah, I disagree with that. I disagree with any engineering feature or signage that promotes making U-turns at intersections. You know, I just don't agree with it. And I do like the fact that all the places that I have lived in Canada do not promote U-turns as a driving culture. But as I said, I've been in a couple of places in the United States. And as 6070 was saying, just had social media stuff with my teenager going on 6'7". I'm not sure what that's about, but anyway, that's the new trend with the teenagers. That they don't do it in California, but I believe they do them. It's part of the driving culture in Arizona, and I know for a fact it's also part of the driving culture in Maryland. So U-turns, roundabouts, we kind of went the long way around there in terms of safety and U-turns and left-hand turns at intersections. Epic, my friend, for some intersections without a left turn lane, is it safe to just be behind the stop line or advanced into the intersection? Which of these two is safer method for left turns? No left turn lanes. Epic, it is not behind the stop line. You're too far away from the intersection. You want to move up so that the front of your car is at the edge of the intersection. The landmark for that at most intersections is the front steer tires on the front crosswalk line. That's your place where you want to wait. Don't be in the intersection. And what you're waiting for, as I mentioned earlier, is front steer tires in the front crosswalk line. You're seeing the oncoming traffic. You see the gap behind the blue truck, for example. The blue truck hits the stop line on the other side of the intersection. That's when you start moving into the intersection. And it's what I call meet the gap. So when you drive in, this car goes past, and then you drive in behind it into the gap. And you can move more traffic through the intersection. It reduces your risk of being involved in a crash because you have some speed up. You're going to reduce the amount of time that you're in the crosshairs of the oncoming traffic coming through the intersection on the other side. 7X, what's going through these drivers' minds when they don't shoulder check? I feel they are in a hurry, but how should pedestrians deal with drivers who don't shoulder check both ways? Pedestrian safety. Yes, 7X, until you get eye contact with the driver or you are 100% sure that the driver is in fact coming to a stop, do not step out onto the roadway. I feel your pain. I walk a lot, probably 8 to 10 kilometers a day, which is 5 or 6 miles a day. I walk the dog. I walk my kids to school. Well, I don't walk them to school anymore. They're teenagers, but I do meet them and walk home with them, and we cross the roadway, and it is busy, even at crosswalks. And this is one downfall of roundabouts is because they promote slightly higher speeds moving through the intersection. And in my experience here with roundabouts, the crosswalks are really close, actually too close to the roundabout. People come screaming up and they're like, oh my God, there's a pedestrian at the roundabout. And they, slamming on the brakes and screeching to a stop to let the pedestrians go past. It's just inevitable. Social driving, the way that people drive after they get their driver's license, not shoulder checking. It is one of the first skills that drivers lose after getting their license, because most are convinced themselves they don't have to shoulder check. I just drove past there. Why do I have to shoulder check? Not realizing that traffic is always changing. It's dynamic. You could go screaming up there, and then all of a sudden a kid or an e-scooter, those types of things, is in the blind area on your vehicle. And, I've got one person over the years, they keep coming back every time I post something about blind areas around my vehicle, around people's vehicles, and that you have to shoulder check. They always come back and they're like, I adjust my mirrors and I was a bus driver and I don't have to. And also, if it's the person that I'm thinking about, they're also a driving instructor who's teaching people that they don't have to shoulder check, which is just abominable in my mind as a professional driving instructor, telling people that I'm a good driver and I don't have to shoulder check and I can adjust my mirrors. That is all false. It is completely false. But people have their opinions when it comes to driving, and there's actually a psychological, there's a term for it, cognitive dissonance. We believe something, and even if the facts tell us something different, they're going to rationalize somehow so that it lines up with their opinion about what they do. And this is what happens with driving all the time, is people have cognitive dissonance. They believe something, they have an opinion about that, and I can talk to them until the cows come home 6 times, and I will never change their mind. And this guy, years and years and years, says the same thing every time and will never change his mind about blind areas around his vehicle and that he doesn't have to shoulder check. And it is just deteriorating with technologies, observation technologies. There's a term for it, ATDS or something. I was looking at it the other day on the internet, but it's basically observation technologies with convex mirrors, blind spot detectors, proximity sensors, backup cameras, that these technologies are eroding people's driving skills on the roadway, and it just reinforces their cognitive dissonance that they don't have to shoulder check because they have all these bells and whistles on their cars that are telling them what to do when they drive, and checking into the blind areas because they have blind spot detectors and they have convex mirrors. Therefore, they don't have to shoulder check. So if you're trying to get people to shoulder check and convince people to shoulder check because ABS, always be scanning, always be looking around your vehicle for exactly the same thing. All right, Epic, how about a light control roundabout? There's one in Easton, Pennsylvania, light controlled roundabout. Yes, I've seen a few of those light controlled roundabouts that has crosswalks placed on the stoplights for left turns. How do you keep yourself safe if you have errant vehicles? I'm not sure, but you're going to have to, go according to the lights. And it's I've seen those both in Australia and in Spain when I was driving in Spain, roundabouts with traffic lights that, just follow the traffic lights. It's the same thing with interstates. Freeways, getting onto the freeway, there will be traffic lights that will be controlling when vehicles are getting onto the freeway, the interstate. And basically what it's trying to do is to reduce congestion on the interstate by regulating cars getting on. So you just simply follow those traffic lights, and that will help moderate some of the flow of traffic moving through roundabouts, moving onto the freeway, onto the interstate, and keeping people safe. Same thing with traffic lights at intersections. And if you're not understanding the traffic lights, and unfortunately years ago, I had this happen with a student on a driver's test. We hadn't been to the intersection. There wasn't a left-hand turn. And this is the other piece going back to driving tests. is the reason that you need to practice in and around the test centers at least a half a dozen times before taking your test, because there are events that may not happen for 2, 3, 4 driving lessons. And this is what happened with my student. Is we went to this intersection, there was a separate traffic light for left-hand turns, and once that traffic light went red, you couldn't make a left-hand turn after that. Of course, the student is nervous, taking his tractor trailer license. He comes up to the intersection. The light is red. The light had been active for the left-hand turning vehicles, so they advanced green, and then the light went red. And my student thought that because the other traffic light was green, that all he had to do was give way to oncoming traffic and that he could proceed on his left-hand turn. Unfortunately, it was a separate traffic light that was red, and he could not turn left, had to wait for the next green light, move through the intersection, and because he moved through, the examiner said to me there wasn't anything I could do. He ran through a red light. I had to fail him. This is what happens if you're not sure about the traffic lights and you haven't been in those intersections when you're under pressure and you're under the stress of a driver's test, and you get into that busy intersection and the examiner gets you to make a left-hand turn at that intersection. There may be some confusion about the traffic light that is controlling left-hand turning vehicles. So be sure that you go and you practice at those intersections in and around the test center so that you can be successful in passing your driver's test and keeping yourself safe when you're making left-hand turns, because it's not just about passing your driver's test, it's also not crashing, right? Because we don't want to crash, especially having and experiencing a T-bone crash owing to the severity of these crashes. Epic, I meant articulated vehicles like tractor trailers and buses, the latter of which you will encounter heavily in cities. How do you keep yourself safe if they're making a left-hand turn than yours? Articulated vehicles, again, if it's a multi-lane roundabout, Epic, and you have these articulated vehicles, as you said, in these trucks, it's the same thing as turning and merging. Merge either in behind or in front of these vehicles to keep yourself safe. You don't want to be beside them because they have such huge blind areas, and especially when they're turning, as they would be moving through a roundabout, behind or in front. You know, if you're the slight bit beside them as you're moving through the roundabout, the multi-lane roundabout, get in behind them. Just slow down and let them go ahead of you and get in behind them to keep yourself safe. Yes. The other part about roundabouts will have a truck apron, which is oftentimes it's colored stamped concrete. It looks like paving stone. In fact, it is colored stamped concrete. We have a few of them here at the roundabouts that we have here in Vernon, and we have them on the slip lanes at some of the larger intersections as well, where they have these kind of pink areas on the inside of the roundabout, and it's called the truck apron, which accommodates the off-tracking of these larger vehicles and allows them to move through the intersection without doing any damage or, you know, interfering with car traffic and other traffic that's moving through the intersection. So they will use that truck apron to compensate for their size and allow them to move through the roundabouts and intersections safely in roundabouts and whatnot. So that's the other way that engineering helps to move these large vehicles through. But most important, do not be beside these vehicles when you're moving through roundabouts to keep yourself safe. Either be in behind them or in front of them. It's the same thing. You just don't want to have vehicles and other traffic in your blind areas. And this is the other reason for shoulder checking, ABS, always be scanning, right? Looking, seeing, understanding traffic patterns, predicting traffic patterns, and then looking at and figuring out the actions of individual road users on the roadway so that you can keep yourself safe and respond accordingly. And you want to have that 3 to 4 second following distance at all times. If you have that 3 to 4 second following distance, space buys you time. Time buys you options. Options prevent crashes because you have 2 or 3 things that you can do if you get into trouble. It's not always about the fact that, you know, you're going to react. Social driving. Most drivers who are participating in the arena of social driving are retaliatory and reactionary. They are following too close to traffic in front, they are stopped too close to traffic in front, and they're hoping on a wing and a prayer that if something goes wrong, that they're going to react in time. And old school defensive driving falls into that model that you're going to react in time and you're going to do the right thing to prevent yourself being in a crash. I am more with Karate Kid and Mr. Miyagi, right? Best block, not be there. It's the same thing with a crash. Best defense against being in a crash is not to be in that situation. By managing speed and space, you're not near anything, and if you're not near anything, it's less likely that you're going to hit something. It's the same thing with left-hand turns. If you're not in the intersection, it's less likely that you're going to be involved in a crash because you're not there. Best block, not be there. Best defensive driving strategy, not be there. Not be in the intersection. So waiting at the edge of the intersection, looking for the gap coming on in traffic on the other side of the intersection. When the car in front of your gap hits the stop line on the other side of the intersection, then you drive straight into the intersection. When that car goes past, you make your left-hand turn, and you've got a head of steam up. You've got some speed so that you can reduce the amount of time that you're in the crosshairs in that location of the oncoming traffic, and you're going to significantly reduce your chances of being involved in a crash. In addition to that, being back at the edge of the intersection, you can look and scan the intersection better because the vulnerable road users, the pedestrians, cyclists, kids on e-scooters, those types of things, all have the right of way on that cross street. At a busy intersection, a big intersection, there's also going to be a right slip lane on the other side of the intersection, and there's going to be cars that are turning right. You don't want to turn in beside them. You either want to time it so that you turn in front of them or you turn in behind them. That's what you want to do to keep yourself safe when executing left-hand turns at busy intersections. And I know, and people will argue with me and they'll come back, and the other school of thinking is that you need to move into the intersection. And if you look at the video, Corey will put that up for you on taking the driver's test in New York City with Sam, my friend Sam. We were doing a mock driver's test in the Bronx. He actually dinged me a couple of points because I didn't do that at one of the intersections. So authorities as well, people that are purportedly in traffic safety, encourage drivers to move into the intersection to ostensibly, which means that, you know, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, that they want to try and move as much traffic through the intersection as possible, and they think that by, you know, lining you up into the intersection is going to do that. It's not going to do that. However, people's driving skills are not all at the same level, and people are not comfortable and haven't been trained properly on how to sit at the edge of the intersection and identify the gap on the other side of the intersection. So only people that are going to do advanced driving skills are going to be able to do that. And I know this from experience of teaching people how to drive and teaching people how to drive big trucks, because if you do graduate to a higher license with a bus or a semi truck, this is the way that you in fact have to move through the intersection. You can't get into the middle of the intersection and then start trying to get gears in a manual transmission, non-synchromesh manual transmission, and get the vehicle going in time that you can move through and clear the intersection. So you have to sit back and meet the gap. So you have to get up into third gear and get a bit of steam up, get a bit of speed up before you execute your turn. Meeting the gap, that's what it's called on left-hand turns. For new drivers learning how to drive, this is a complex maneuver because, as I said, there's 3, maybe 4 things that you're looking at and monitoring while you're sitting there and waiting if you don't have an advanced left-hand turn. If you don't have an advanced left turning light, you have to be watching the traffic light, you have to be watching the oncoming traffic, you have to be watching the pedestrians and vulnerable road users on the cross street, and if it's a busy, big intersection, there's going to be a right turning lane on the other side. You have to be watching that as well. You have to be monitoring all these things at the same time, and if the traffic is busy, You have to be watching the traffic light, and you have to go the instant the traffic light turns yellow, start moving into the intersection and watching that oncoming traffic and ensuring, double checking, triple checking that that oncoming traffic is coming to a stop, so that when you get to where you're going to start turning left, you're going to turn left and the oncoming traffic is in fact stopped, and that you can complete your turn. If you get stuck and the traffic light goes red, you have to clear the intersection. You can't sit there in the intersection. Know that for the purposes of passing your driver's test, and know that for keeping yourself safe and other people safe on the roadways when you're driving. The result of misjudging the gap or making an error on a left-hand turn, which is at high risk for new drivers, beginner drivers. I know many years ago, when I first got my license, I had a very near miss on a left-hand turn. And I'm sure that there are many drivers who do. Hopefully nothing happens. Hopefully it does not result in a crash. T-bone crashes, there are videos here on the channel why T-bone crashes are so dangerous, and Corey will put those up for you. They result because of the dynamics, the physics of the vehicle, that there is very little in the vehicle that is protecting you. It's not like a head-on crash where the entire front of the vehicle is a crumple zone and designed to dissipate the energy in the vehicle. And we talked about that last week in terms of speed. With increased speed, the amount of energy, the amount of damage that's going to be done if you're in a crash increases exponentially. So if you go from 20 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour, that's 5 times the amount of speed in the vehicle. You haven't increased the energy by 5 times, you've increased the energy by 25 times. So the chances of surviving a crash at 100 miles an hour are almost nil, regardless of all the safety features in modern vehicles with airbags and seat belts and breakaway steering wheels and crumple zones. You're not going to survive it because of the sheer amount of energy in the vehicle. And Corey's put up that video on how to avoid T-bone crashes. Thank you for that, Corey. And yes, I did fail the New York driver's test in New York City. And this is about creating habits and skills that are going to keep you safe. I made a right-hand turn on a red light. You can't do that in the 5 boroughs in New York City. Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island. You can't make right turns on red lights unless there is a sign that says you in fact can make a right turn. And, you know, I didn't practice. I just went into it cold and came up to the red light and stopped, scanned the intersection, and then I made a right turn, and Sam laughed and said, "You just failed your driver's test." So practice for the skills of passing your driver's test in and around the test center where you're going to be taking your driver's test, and go to the intersections where you potentially could make a left-hand turn. Figure out the traffic lights, figure out the traffic signs, figure out where the schools are, because school is in session. As you know, speeding in a school zone is an automatic fail on a driver's test. Know that, keep yourself safe, and pass your driver's test. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't answered the poll already, answer the poll. Hit that thumbs up button. And remember, pick the best answer, not necessarily the right answer. Have a great night. All the best. Bye.